Hello and welcome to Lynchburg Live. I'm your host, Linda Smith, and probably the first thing you're going to notice is that I got a haircut. I thought it was time for a change, and so far I like it. And if I get to the point I don't like it, we'll just let it grow back out. My guest tonight is Paul Calland. Paul has been with us on an earlier show in January talking about competitive biking. When he was my guest in January, I pointed out that Paul wears many hats. And Paul is also the owner of a business called Celestial Doves. And tonight he's going to tell us just what that is. And Paul, it's so good to have you back on the show.
Thank you for having me.
As we get started, will you just tell our audience what Celestial Doves is?
Yes. Celestial Doves is a dove release business that I have. And in a nutshell, they are solid white homing pigeons that I release at certain events. For mourning or for celebrating. I do all different types of events. Whenever you think of throwing rice or releasing balloons or having balloons, you know, think of a dove release instead.
Throw a dove.
Yeah, throw a dove. Yep.
How did you get interested in doing this, Paul? I mean, you know, as long as I've known you, I didn't know about this until you were on the show earlier.
Well, I've been doing it for 33 years. Not the actual business, but the birds themselves I've been into for 33 years. And when I was a teenager, you know, I loved animals, still love animals. I had some quail. And a friend of mine in the neighborhood said, you know, I know this gentleman across town that has these pigeons. You ought to go talk to him. So I jumped on my moped one Saturday and I ride over through this neighborhood and I find his home and he's outside and I pedal on up and I just introduced myself, and he didn't have any kids of his own, and you know he was probably then in his late 50s, and took me down to his pigeon loft, and all these birds were flying everywhere, and I was just amazed. And from that day on, every time I went over there, he would send me home with boxes of birds. So I would strap these birds, homing pigeons, of all varieties of color, on the back of my moped, and I would go home, and the birds just grew from there. And I had a little cage that I put on top of my dad's tool shed, and I was stuffing them in that. And then one day my dad just said, you know, take half the tool shed. He let me convert that into a little pigeon loft, and away it went. So ever since.
So that's really...
That gentleman was Auger Wooldridge.
Right, now something you said, these are not actual doves. These are pigeons that are white.
Yes, and I do have the actual white ringneck doves that I use for displays, and they're a smaller dove like you would see in the pet store. And the pet store occasionally does sell these doves, but they are not for release. So if anyone ever goes to an event and you see small white doves and they say they're going to release them, you know, that's not good because they will die.
Oh,
they don't, yeah, they're not, they're domesticated. They won't go out and survive. The homing pigeons actually fly back to my house to their home coop.
Right. Do you have to have a special permit or a license to raise your doves for business purposes?
No, I do not. Only thing you have to be careful are zoning laws.
That was what...
and with the pigeons, today, you can have them. The only problem you would run into is if they smell, if you didn't take care of them. And recently in the news, you might have seen there was a fellow in another part of Virginia that has hundreds and hundreds of pigeons of all varieties, and the neighbors have filed a grievance against him, and he'll probably have to get rid of them. But that's just typical poor pet ownership.
Right.
You know, you got to take care of your animals. So if they do smell and the neighbors complained, I would have to do something. But I don't keep that many, and I'm diligent about cleaning the loft and keeping them healthy.
I'm sure you are.
Yeah.
So there is no zoning?
No, no zoning that I know of, and you know, I've only had them in about 3 locations through my life, so, and I've checked the zonings there and there's never been an issue.
What are the main events that you do dove releases for?
Unfortunately, the most is funerals, because there's so many funerals, and I work with the local funeral homes, and there's a lot of funerals. I do probably half a dozen or less weddings a year, and the weddings take a lot of time and planning. And you know, a few grand openings, the ball games at the city stadium. Every now and then I might get a call for them to go do the first game or whatever. Problem with those is some of those are late in the evening and I can't release but so late into the evening. But the main thing would be funerals. but I'll release a dove for anything. We have packages that we can put together with anything from 1 dove up to 100 doves. You know, birthdays, anniversaries, you name it. You know, we can do it.
If you don't want to answer this question, this is all right, but I'm just wondering how much a dove release costs, or,
Right.
or are there different costs for different packages, different
Exactly.
events?
Yes. My packages start at $125, and what I have, anything from just a display up to a release, and then I discount some if you do a release and a display. Sometimes if it's a big enough release, I do the display free, and the display can be extended certain hours into the event. But you know, they go on up to $400, you know, for a lot of birds, which, you know, that's a lot of handling.
I'm sure.
I do all the releases, so I show up in the appropriate attire, and if it's like an anniversary or a wedding, I work with the florist and do the colors appropriate for my releases, the baskets and whatnot. So it's a lot of work goes into it, but it's enjoyable.
How many doves do you release at a specific event, or is it a different number of doves for a different kind of event, or
exactly.
size of the event?
Right. Like what I'll do, if we have a service member that has passed away or killed in the line of duty, we'll do the family, like the widow or the mother or father or the closest relative living, will release 1 dove, which would represent the spirit dove, and then I would do like a 21 dove salute, and we have 21 doves that would go up single file as a 21 dove salute, and sometimes we can do that with the actual 21 gun salute. That kind of spooks them sometimes.
I was going to ask you, doesn't that scare them?
Yes, typically we'll do the gun first and then stall 30 seconds, and the birds kind of are scatterbrained at that point, but most of the time people don't recognize that. Unless they've seen several releases, they would recognize that. But it's a lot of fun. There's so many things you can do.
I'm sure.
But anywhere from, the most I release is 12. Most people want a dozen, and that's a good flock to get the wow factor, along with a hand release by the person the event is for, whether it be the wedding couple or the anniversary or Mother's Day, which is coming up, or Father's Day or whatnot.
I was going to ask you later, since we're into this, I'll ask you now, if like a bride and a groom, if they wanted to do a release, can they physically release the bird?
They can. I try to talk them out of that, because what happens after the ceremony, they'll come out to the front of the church or the side, wherever they choose, and if I have time beforehand, I'll show them how to handle the doves. In the past, what happens if the dove squirms, or sometimes they'll let it go, and I bring extras for that reason, but you can't control the dove's bodily functions. So, and like any bird, when it's got to go, it's got to go. And I really try to draw them away from that. And I have decorative baskets, small heart-shaped baskets that will hold 1 bird, and the bride and groom can each hold one of those and then just open it. Or I have a larger heart-shaped basket that can sit on a pedestal, and that's the most popular, and then they both put a hand and open it, and the doves fly out. And I bring extra doves as well, no charge for the photographer, because if he fails to get the first one, you know, we can do it over and over for that purpose.
I didn't know if you had to sort of give them some training if they did that themselves.
We do.
But
every now and then someone really wants to do the hands-on, and that's fine. That's really connects you with the bird, and it's a little more personal. You know, I just show them how to hold the bird and what to expect. You know, he's going to squirm a little bit, but you're only holding him for a few seconds before you actually let him go. But yes, we do, to answer your question, we do hands-on release.
Is there a distance limit that your birds...
There is.